So China appears keen to settle the border. There are multiple reasons behind this shift: their internal turmoil, their external threats, and the weak economy. But there's something else too. The capacity of the Chinese military. It's under scrutiny. Do they have the military muscle for a long-term standoff with India? This question is being asked again because the PLA has suffered a big blow this year. The PLA is the People's Liberation Army. That's what the Chinese army is called. A few months back, it lost a submarine, most likely in the month of May or June. The submarine sank, and it wasn't even finished yet. China was building the sub in Wuhan, and before the PLA could start using it, it went underwater. And this wasn't just another submarine. This was China's latest cutting-edge nuclear sub. The new Zhou-class line of vessels, known for their distinctive X-shaped stern. That's the back of the submarine, the stern. This is where you find parts like the propeller and the rudder. They help the submarine move underwater. This X shape, in fact, had generated a lot of hype. Apparently, the shape improves the vessel's maneuverability. But as it turned out, the Chinese submarine had a more pressing issue: staying afloat. It failed. So Beijing tried to sink the story with the sub. They tried their best to hide this incident. Reports say the government ordered a cover-up, but they were exposed by satellites. Take a look at these pictures. This is the shipyard in Wuhan. The images were captured in May and June. In the month of May, you can clearly spot a submarine-like vessel here, but by June, the vessel is gone. In its place, there are a bunch of cranes. An American researcher, in fact, shared these images. His name is Thomas Shugart, and he found this activity unusual. Where did the submarine go? And why were there so many cranes needed at the shipyard? The conclusion was this: the submarine had sunk and the cranes were there to pull it out. In fact, let me quote from what Shugart said. Listen to this. Can you imagine a US nuclear submarine sinking in San Diego and the government hushes it up and doesn't tell anybody about it? I mean, holy cow. Well, the US agrees with this assessment, and as you can imagine, they're happy to share the news of China's failure. But this incident has also sparked some concerns, like what was on the submarine? Was it just an empty vessel? Were there personnel on board? And worse, did this vessel have nuclear fuel? Because this was not a traditional sub. Nuclear submarines have a small reactor on them, and this reactor is what powers the submarine. So the question is, did China install a reactor on this submarine? Was it carrying nuclear fuel? Did it suffer any damage? So far, there are no reports of a radiation leak, but China could have loaded nuclear fuel on this submarine. Experts say it is quite possible, but it's hard to confirm. Next question. Did China manage to retrieve the submarine? The reports say that it was, in fact, eventually salvaged. But this whole incident, the sinking of a high-tech submarine, is an embarrassment for Beijing. It has the world's biggest navy. These submarines were supposed to project China's naval prowess. Instead, they have become underwater paperweights. And that's what is raising questions about China's military capability. Is it truly war-ready? Can Chinese soldiers fight a real war? And how effective are Chinese weapons? You see, to win a war, you broadly need two things: trained soldiers and reliable weapons. And on both fronts, China appears to be falling short. Its soldiers lack real combat experience. The PLA's last war was way back in 1979 when China invaded Vietnam. Deng Xiaoping was in power at the time, 1979. He wanted to, and I'm quoting, teach Vietnam a lesson. Instead, it was the Chinese who learned a lesson. They lost the war. It's been 44 years since. In all this time, China has not fought any war. So its soldiers do not have real combat skills. There are only a few Chinese generals today who can say that they've seen any real action. And what about the weapons? Well, they don't inspire any confidence either. We've already told you about the submarine that sank. Now look at this. This story came out in January. Instead of fuel, Chinese missiles had water. At least a dozen defense officials faced action over this. They were accused of corruption. And corruption is quite rampant in the PLA. Xi Jinping has personally led the cleanup operation. Since coming to power in 2013, he has purged thousands of officials over graft, including two former defense ministers, Li Shangfu and Wei Fenghe. Before taking the top job, both Li and Wei had important posts. Li handled the PLA's Equipment Development Department, and Wei was the first general of China's rocket force. Both leaders now face corruption charges. They're accused of taking bribes during weapons procurement. Now let's connect these dots. China has submarines that sink, missiles that are filled with water, soldiers with no combat experience, and a corrupt top brass. So while Xi Jinping may like to project an image of strength, the cracks in his armor are showing. The PLA may have great numbers, but it is crippled by corruption and incompetence.